I mean, I saw that MSNBC coverage of the Madison Square Garden rally the week before the election, where they literally intercut images of a 1930s Nazi event and said, yeah, well, back in the day in the 30s, there was a Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
They don't say it wasn't the same building. They don't point that out, or indeed at all similar in any way whatsoever. They say another fascist leader. That was the phrase that was used. Another fascist leader was supported back.
I love that.
And of course, then all these videos go viral of the various people at the and all these Star of David flags being flown. They weren't at Nuremberg, as far as I recall.
No.
Various black people, Hispanic people, gay people, all these gay Nazis, black Nazis, Jewish Nazis. A lot of Jewish Nazis were there. And you watch all of this, and you just think, isn't it weird? Not only that the Democrats have been doubling down on this "everyone's a fascist" thing, but that actually the reverse is quite obviously true insofar as Trump has been a unifying force. Whatever you think of him, and I'm not a big fan of him as a politician, but all of these different demographics all turning towards him, all putting aside their immutable characteristics and saying that we are all supporting that something needs to happen, some major change needs to happen in society. It is by definition unifying. But I've written I wrote about 3 or 4 pieces about this because I get so aggravated about the misuse of fascism as a phrase. I even wrote an article to go back to Mussolini's original essay on what fascism means, the one he wrote with that philosopher Gentile, and just to work out. And what's quite clear is that from what Mussolini perceived fascism to be, you could see elements that overlap with every major Western political party on the left and the right. So if your only criteria for fascism is that it ticks a few of the boxes, then everyone's a fascist. And indeed, you had Kamala Harris and Tim Walz doubling down on this idea that this was going to be a fascist thing. You had Oprah Winfrey saying, what was it, that we may never be able to vote again, this histrionic nonsense. You also had Donald Trump repeatedly calling Kamala Harris a fascist. I don't think this is helpful, sensible, or mature. This is just that sounds to me like infants squabbling who don't know anything about history.
In one line, what is fascism?
In one line? Well, I mean, Mussolini wrote a whole essay on it, but let's just say, I suppose, in a nutshell, it has to be a movement that involves the militaristic repression of dissent,
right.
Typically tinged with some kind of ethno-nationalist quality or perception of supremacy, that pushes for a one-party state, eliminates opposition. But again, like different, that ethno-nationalist element is less present in Mussolini's fascist party than the Nazi party in Germany. So already there's these distinctions between it. It's effectively authoritarianism writ large to extreme extents. So the kind of things that people were accusing Trump of doing in the future, maybe, like putting people into gulags or banning the right to vote for another party, yes, that would fall very much into the fascist bracket.
Okay.
But I think what we need to do is perhaps consign the word to history. Say that the fascist movement was a very specific, ugly movement of the mid-20th century, and it's not there anymore. There are neo-fascists and neo-Nazis, but they're not in mainstream political parties.
I see. That's really interesting. I think it, as you say, people don't often think enough about what the word actually means. We're just throwing thought-terminating cliches out.
Sure. I know. I mean, you could go down the road of saying that fascism had to entail the idea of this collaboration with corporate bodies and the state, and the idea that corporations effectively advance the interests of their workers in collaboration with, but subordination to, the interests of the state. That's one of the things that Mussolini continually talks about in this essay, and continually writes about. The deference to the state is key. So that's another key factor. But you could list, 20 odd different factors that contribute to his conceptualization of fascism, and you could work out where do the Republicans tick the boxes and where do the Democrats tick the boxes. You might be surprised to find that the Democrats probably tick a few more boxes, but there are things like Trump said in the week before the election that he thought if you burnt an American flag, you should have a year in prison automatically. I consider that a deeply authoritarian concept. He was trying to find extra votes when he lost the last election. I consider that an authoritarian idea. Tim Walz said explicitly in his vice presidential debate with J.D. Vance that he doesn't think that hate speech ought to be covered by the First Amendment. John Kerry obviously another major Democrat figure, had said that the First Amendment was a major block. That's his phrase, not mine. A major block to the struggle against disinformation. These are all deeply, profoundly authoritarian things. But so too in this country, you know, we had the Conservative Party pushing the police crime and sentencing bill, effectively empowering the police to shut down protest if they're a bit too noisy. Well, protests tend to be a bit noisy and annoying. They smuggled through some legislation at the last minute before the coronation to try and deal with potential protesters there. These are deeply authoritarian ideas as well. They introduced the Online Safety Act, which is another authoritarian act, another bill that I think would tick one of those boxes. Similarly, the Labour Party, scotching the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act the night before Parliament goes into recess so they can avoid a debate on the subject. That too is authoritarian. The way in which there is clear evidence of some kind of collusion between the government and the judiciary when it comes to the extreme draconian sentencing of people during the riots in the summer. It's got nothing to do with the Prime Minister. It's meant to be separate from the judiciary. That going on is also deeply authoritarian. The fact that neither major political party in the UK has ever stood up and said, actually, we need to have a debate about these hate speech laws, which are encoded into the Public Order Act and the Communications Act. We need to get rid of them if we believe in a free society. No one's saying that. No politician is standing up and saying any of this. All of this is authoritarian. This is why I don't believe that any major party in the West is without its authoritarian elements. I think authoritarianism is like a weed that can emerge in any field and has to be pulled out.